In this survivor story, a 15-year-old was confronted by the killer who she begged to spare her family's lives, including her younger siblings. All 7 family members would be shot at, but Cassidy Stay survived and would warn police that their killer wasn't done taking lives. You are such a genuine gem. Thank you for clicking on my video. I'm Brooke Mckenna. Cassidy is another survivor. She has actually a wonderful story of what happened to her that day, why she believes she survived. In doing so, it saved many other lives as well, and they know that for a fact at this point. There was a whole plan to murder many more people. This family was not the end of this killer's spree. And so she truly caught a killer and survived his attempt to murder her. And she has been such a positive woman, little girl at first, and then woman she's grown into, who ended up testifying against him. So we'll go into what exactly she said about him, what she believes should happen to him, how she feels. We'll go into all of that. So let's go ahead and get into the story. But first, I want to thank our sponsor, Sudoku. Now, Sudoku is a wood block puzzle game that is also combined with a Sudoku grid. So you could be playing it right now, challenging your mind while also listening to this video, instead of doing the typical social media doom scroll that I think all of us do that just leads to anxiety and negativity. For me, I'd much rather be playing a game like this that challenges your brain and actually works your IQ. I also kind of love that you're not just playing against a whole bunch of faceless accounts, you are playing against yourself. Basically, it's just you and the game, and you are trying to get better each and every time, which is actually a huge motivator of mine, to just be better for me instead of better against other people. But Sudoku is entirely free to play on iOS and Android, and you can download in my link below, or you can download with the QR code on the screen. And it's a fun way to be able to get a break from social media while supporting this channel as well. It truly means so much to me when you guys support the sponsors who support this channel, who allow me to do what I do. It's just a full circle of just pure gratefulness. Now let's get into the story. So it was 2014 in Texas, and the Stay family lived in Harris County at 711 Leaflet Lane in the Enchanted Oaks subdivision. And this was 39-year-old Stephen and his 33-year-old wife Katie, as well as their 5 children, who were 15-year-old Cassidy, 13-year-old Brian, 9-year-old Emily, 6-year-old Rebecca, and 4-year-old Zachary. Now, they had moved to Texas from California about 2 years prior for Stephen, the father's real estate business. Stephen and Katie, the parents, were said to be so in love. They were fully committed to one another. This was a truly happy family. It was just an all-around very loving and supportive family. They were also Mormons. They went to church often, and all of the kids were said to be very well behaved. But on July 9th of 2014, a 911 call came from the Stay residence, and a very obviously young girl was calling, and she would explain in a frantic tone that her entire family had been shot. She said this over and over and over again. She was asking for help. She was crying. She was terrified, but she was also sounding so incredibly strong in that moment to make this call. There was also some ragged breathing and moaning in the background, as though somebody else, one of her other family members, thought to be one of her siblings, was heard dying. Now, she would allegedly say, "I don't know what's going on or why he did this."
911. I just got shot. I've been shot. My family has been shot. What is your name? Cassidy Stay.
Because during this call, Cassidy would name their killer. When the first responders arrived, Cassidy would tell them, "We've all been shot. My sister's moving, but I think they're all dead." Now, she was, of course, bleeding from the wound in her head. She was rushed to the hospital. She also was rushed with her youngest sibling, Zach, who was the 4-year-old, because at this point, he was still breathing. So they were both taken. Zach had been shot in the shoulder and the back of the head. However, Zach did die shortly after going to the hospital, and Cassidy would be the lone survivor. A bullet had actually grazed the back of Cassidy's head that was meant to execute her like the rest of her family. But she was found to only have a fractured skull. And also part of her finger was injured and believed to be lost during this incident. But this 15-year-old girl would bravely tell the police that she and her siblings had been home alone. She was the oldest at 15. Her parents had run an errand, and so she was watching all 4 of her siblings. And then she heard a knock on the door, and she answered, and she came face to face with this FedEx driver. And he wanted to talk to her parents, but she said that they were not actually there, and so the FedEx man left. However, Cassidy said that he returned, and that is when he would introduce himself. Cassidy was told that the man she didn't recognize was her uncle, or at least he used to be, and still Cassidy didn't know if she could trust him, and she didn't want to let him in, and so she tried to close the door, but he kicked it back open and forced himself inside with a gun. He began to order all of the siblings into the living room. He would tie them up and lie them face down. And when her parents returned home, she said her parents were forced to do exactly the same thing, and all 7 family members were shot that day. One after another, including Cassidy. And at this time, the full story of Cassidy's bravery was not really told. This was just a snippet of what had happened, but what she had actually gone through that day, what had happened to all of them, and what she had endured would only come out at the trial. Now, the man Cassidy identified as their killer was apprehended pretty quickly, and this was due to Cassidy. You see, she had named this man, and also the fact that he had stolen their family car, and she knew that, so they went tracking this vehicle.
Are they still there? Who shot him? My Uncle Ronnie. Dad, where's your uncle? My uncle, his name is Ronnie. Where is he? He left to take his kids. Oh, your uncle shot him? Yeah.
And so a low-speed chase would ensue for the next 4 miles, and they quickly located this car, and they ended up using those spike strips and decided to ram his car to get him to stop at this certain cul-de-sac. So all of the residents in that area where they had cordoned off this vehicle were evacuated, and what police in that area didn't know was that the man inside the car was actually on the phone with 911 because he had called the operator saying that this was an emergency, that he had 20 officers pointing guns at him. When the operator asked what his location was, he said he was sure that they knew where he was. The operator asked his name, and he allegedly said, one of many. And then through this phone call, you could hear that one of the officers at the scene came up to talk to him to try to get him out of the car. And he was saying, we're going to be here for a while, bud. Let's pretend I'm not stupid. I need to talk to my brother. You can call my parents. You know I'm not coming out. I'm not going to jail. I'm just not right in the head. Like I can't think right. Then he started telling the officer that he noticed the sniper that they had on the roof and that he didn't have a good shot at him. 3 hours later, this man would get out of the car finally and surrender. Officers found that inside of his car, he had a loaded gun, and he was in fact on his way to kill more family members. There was also a fresh fast food drink in his cup holder, as though he had just picked it up. You see, this man was known to the Stay family as Uncle Ronnie. This was a 33-year-old named Ronald Haskell. Ronald grew up in a very good home with a loving family. They were Mormons. He understood it right from wrong, but he had changed. Ronald had been voted class clown in high school. He was voted the king for prom and for homecoming. Everyone said he was a normal guy. He was carefree, and one classmate said he made you feel like you could be exactly who you were. He was just that goofy, fun-loving guy, and everybody liked him. As he got older, he worked different jobs. He worked for FedEx, he worked at a cheese factory, and this was all to support his family, which included his wife Melanie and their 4 children. They had gotten married back in 2002, and they were building this house together in Utah. They were going to the Church of the Latter-day Saints together, and they seemed like a really good family. However, a neighbor would later come forward and say that Melanie had confided in her that she was being abused by Ronnie, but she believed that it would stop with time. However, around the time of the murders, Ronald was divorced. He was no longer working with FedEx, though he did keep the uniform, and he was set to move out of their shared home in Utah, and he was living in California with his parents. He was said around this time to be very depressed and angry, and family would say he was not leaving his room, he was not going out or eating at all during this time. The breaking point for Melanie was that she noticed that their oldest child was beginning to act like Ronald. And so she knew that she had to get them out of there. So at this point, when Ronald was at his parents' house, his wife and kids had moved to a community abuse prevention agency for a while before they moved to another secure location. So nobody actually lived in that house that they were building in Utah. And during the time of the divorce, Melanie's divorce attorney said that he wonders if he should have done something, because Ron always had such good demeanor. He never raised his voice, but he could tell that there was this feeling that there was something behind the exterior, and he feared for Melanie during that divorce process. But when Melanie and then Ronald moved to separate states, he thought that she was safe. Although this lawyer would say you can't plan for crazy. But on Ronald's road trip for murder to Texas, he allegedly stopped in Utah to steal a gun from one of his ex-girlfriends, and then he would go to Texas to stalk the Stay family for 2 days before specifically killing them on the day of July 9th. Now that Ronald was in custody, according to his lawyer, Ronald admitted to the murders, but he also pled not guilty by reason of insanity. Now, Ronald's lawyer was Neil Davis, and they were really pushing the defense of insanity. They said that Ronald was diagnosed with schizophrenia in prison and once claimed he heard voices that told him to execute the Stay family. His lawyer said that Ronald had tried to get help for years, didn't want to be this way, but he had no control. However, there was not any written proof that I could find that he was diagnosed with schizophrenia or any other mental illness. That he was charged with 6 counts of capital murder on July 10th, 2014 and held without bond. Now, Cassidy, who had been recovering in the hospital, was released from the Children's Memorial Herman's Hospital on July 11th, 3 days after the attack, and she would return to none of her immediate family because they had been taken away from her. And she was said to be in good condition, expecting a full recovery, and her grandparents, who were now her main support system, said that they believed that she was a little hero. They were in awe of her bravery. But that same day she was released, Ronald actually was taken to court to hear his charges. And once he heard this, he began shaking and then collapsed. The security guards would pick him back up and he would collapse once again, and then he was wheeled out in a wheelchair. While in jail, he made a phone call, which was recorded. He was having a hard time in jail because he didn't feel guilty, and it was hard to repent for things he didn't feel guilty for because he doesn't think it's wrong. The very next day, Cassidy stood bravely in front of the crowd of people at her family's memorial, and she held up her hand and she said, "I love you," in sign language. Now, she was amazingly positive as she spoke.
I'm really thankful for all of the people that have been praying for me and keeping me and my family in their thoughts for the past couple days. And I would like to thank all of the first responders, nurses, and doctors that have taken care of me. I'm feeling a lot better, and I'm on a very straightforward path to a full recovery. Happiness can be found even in the darkest of times, if one only remembers to turn on the light.
J.K. Rowling then heard this and sent Cassidy a personalized letter from Dumbledore. And there was a GoFundMe set up for Cassidy, which reached over 400,000 donations, and it would have gotten more, but they decided to close it because it was so generous of everybody. They were so thankful, and the money is said to be going towards Cassidy's trust fund for her future. And family friends say that Cassidy is a survivor. She always has been. She was the strong little girl, just like her mother. But this is where things really were revealed, and that was when Ronald's trial began in August of 2019, 4 years after the murders. The jury rejected that Ronald was not guilty by reason of insanity, and Ronald was going to be charged with 2 of the deaths, which is all they needed for capital murder charges. Throughout this trial, Ronald would never look up. He was never said to show emotion, but he didn't even care to look at the people testifying. The lead investigator on this case testified that the day of the murders, Ronald was said to check out of the Days Inn motel. He stopped at a Walmart, then he stopped at Murphy's Oil for gas, and hours prior to the killing of almost an entire family, he went to the movie theater and he watched 22 Jump Street. And after the murders, he drove by Sonic and grabbed a drink. Now, Ronald's brother testified that he still had good in him, that Ronnie could help people because he does have remorse, and that he doesn't have the understanding of the actual events that occurred. But a forensic psychologist testified that he believed Ronald was very low risk of reoffending. that he had bipolar disorder and schizophrenic behavior. Now, Ronald's ex-wife, Melanie, testified that the moment that she heard of her sister's murder, she knew that her ex-husband did it. That she had been threatened, that she was going to have to watch her family die, and he carried that promise. She was actually living around the area in Texas at that time with their children, but thankfully was in a secure location and Ronald was not able to get to them before he was arrested. Cassidy Stay would then testify for 90 minutes. She was around 19 to 20 at this time, and she said she hadn't just laid down like her uncle wanted her to do and let him do whatever he wanted to her family. Before her parents arrived home, Cassidy began to plead with him to not hurt them. He was forcing them into the living room with a gun, and Cassidy managed to push away her own fear, and she got the remote. She turned on Netflix for all of the rest of the kids so that they were distracted and not really understanding what was going on here. She then started telling Uncle Ronnie all of the names and ages of her siblings, trying to appeal to his humanity. She said she didn't think anyone would actually hurt kids, but she was wrong. She said, I feel like the light got sucked out. I started to get nervous. I said, please don't hurt us. Please don't hurt us. I knew how dangerous he was. When their parents arrived home around 10 minutes later from their errand, he told them he had come to get his kids. She said that her mother, Katie, lost control of her bladder at this point when she saw him and what he was doing to the kids. And then Ronnie had this pillow over his gun acting as a silencer. And he was asking everybody where his wife was, who was really his ex, Melanie. And no one answered, so he began to count every individual in the room to make sure all family members were there. And then Katie, at this point, the mother, lunged at him, tried to stop him, got in between him and her children, and she was shot in the face. Cassidy watched her fall and then watched him go down the line of her family members shooting them. She said she heard the boom, 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 and in that moment she began screaming. She prayed, and this was out loud, and Ronnie actually mocked her, saying, oh, what did he say? Then he turned to Cassidy, and Cassidy, who was screaming, said she heard this voice in her head that was telling her to be quiet. So she went quiet, and this bullet that was supposed to hit her in the back of the head grazed her. She pretended to go limp, and everything was silent, and she was hearing drips. And she looked in the direction, very slightly, and noticed that it was blood dripping off of her sister. She didn't move, though, until she knew her uncle had left. But Cassidy explained that at that moment, the room smelled like blood. It tasted sour, it felt hot and heavy, and there was no spirit in that room. Cassidy said that when her youngest brother, Zach, was shot, he actually survived the first time. He ran to his father, into his father's shoulder, and curled up into him, but his father was already dead. And at this point, Ronnie shot Zach in the back of the head, killing him. So after Cassidy told this to the court, she spoke directly to Ronnie. And she said,
5 years, I've always wanted to know how you felt about me and what kind of remorse you felt. And my family always said that you only felt sorry for yourself, and I didn't want to believe that because I thought, surely he has to feel bad for killing my family. And when I heard that you felt no remorse, something changed inside of me. And I didn't know what to do with that change, and it was causing me a lot of hurt and anger because that was my closure. My closure was the hope that you would feel bad. I no longer have the desire for any closure because this is it. There's nothing left on this earth that will soothe my wounds and worries. Only God can help me now. And that's what I've decided to do with my resentment and my anger towards you. I'm letting go of my emotions, and I'm giving it to God.
She then showed the jury the scar on her head from where that bullet had grazed her. She also reenacted the fight that her mother, Katie, and Ronnie had in that living room. And she even pointed out the killer to the jury and stared him down, even though he was too much of a coward to even look her way. Cassidy explained that once she realized that this man was her Uncle Ronnie, this wasn't comforting at all because she knew how awful of a person he was. She knew that he was abusive, or at least, bad to her aunt, prior to their divorce. She said she knew that it was fully him that killed her family. It was not any voices in his head or a mental illness. And this is why prosecutors believed that Ronald's motive was revenge, that he was sane. You see, a year prior to the murders, Ronald's wife, Melanie, left him. Melanie was Cassidy's mother, Katie's sister, so on her mother's side. And Melanie and Ronald hadn't just fallen out of love. Melanie had began to confide in her family that Ronald was very abusive. In fact, back in June of 2008, Melanie had actually gone to the police and claimed that Ronald had dragged her out of her bedroom by the hair, began punching her in her face. She got away. She ran to their children's bedroom to protect them, and he did the same thing in that room. While the kids watched, he pulled their mother out by her hair, was beating on her, and thankfully she got away and could call 911. At this point, they had 2 kids who were 3 and 5, and they witnessed all of this. So the Logan City Police Department charged him with domestic assault and domestic violence in the presence of a child. But Ronald claimed that he only pushed her and that he was just stressed from work. He pled guilty to a simple assault charge, and the charges were dismissed under a plea deal. Though he would go to police the next year in 2009 to say that his wife had left the family and she was going to go harm herself. Now, he would call back and say that he found her, he was taking her to the hospital, and that was pretty much the end of that. But Melanie received a protective order, a restraining order against Ronald, and then filed for divorce. And in August of 2013, Melanie reported that Ronald had violated this protective order. And then in October of 2013, he also did the same thing by showing up at the children's school. That same month, the restraining order was dismissed due to the fact that the divorce proceedings that were ongoing at this time included a mutual restraining order. So Melanie then gained full custody of the children after Ronald underwent a psychological evaluation, though it's unknown what this found. But during this time, many said that Ronald was doing a lot better. He was getting help. He was on medication. And then the divorce was finalized on Valentine's Day of 2014. But it was also found that Ronald wasn't just abusive to his wife. Ronald's own mother, Carla Haskell, said that 5 months after that divorce, in July of 2014, Ronald had come to her home and asked her if she was still in contact with his ex-wife. And she was. And that is when he forced his own mother into the garage, tied her to a computer chair, and then began yelling at her, telling her he was going to kill her and her family and any officer who tried to stop him. He then hid her phones, tried to choke her, and she ended up passing out. 911 was called when her daughter came home and found her, but after the 911 call was placed, it took officers 3 hours to arrive, and by then, Ronald was gone. Now, Carla said she was trying to get a restraining order against her son after this, but the police have no record of this. His sister also said she applied for a restraining order for her brother, saying that she was afraid that Ronald was going to come back and harm her, too. Ronald was also known to have stolen guns from their home before, and those guns had been confiscated by police. Only 6 days later, Ronald would murder his ex-wife's sister and her sister's entire family. Now, Katie lived in Texas, Melanie had moved to Texas, and also they had a sister named Ariel who also lived in Texas. And Ariel said that prior to the murders happening, Ronald had called his son, who was, living with them, and was asking him all sorts of questions about their schedule and childcare. And she said in that moment she was very scared he was coming. Then she said that day that they heard that Katie and her family had been murdered, they fled the home. They did not have shoes. The kids didn't have extra diapers. They just left because they were terrified he was on his way to them. So prosecutors laid it out that they believed that Ronald had attacked his mother and then went and stole the gun and then purchased 200 rounds of ammunition, drove it all the way from California to Texas. But they also believed he wasn't just going to stop with the Stay family, that he wanted to kill every single member of Melanie's family that he could find. Anyone who encouraged Melanie to leave him. This was believed to be around 22 people or more. But it was said that Katie was attacked first, Katie and her family, because Katie was actually the one who went all the way to Utah a year prior when the divorce proceedings were first occurring to help Melanie with all of it. Prosecutors were certain that he had meticulously planned this, and they showed evidence including letters where he had actual victims' names and addresses written on it. Now, prosecutors were aiming for the death sentence, claiming that Ronald had revenge in his heart, and prosecutor Samantha Knecht said
He's a manipulator. He's a liar. He won't change. And quite frankly, he doesn't want to change. Because we talked about what's the best predictor of future behavior. It's past behavior. Look at his resume. That this is a case that you all will never forget. This is a case that will be forever seared in your mind. It's one of those. We told you at the beginning that this was a case about a plan. A plan that was created in anger and fueled by vengeance. And we proved to you that he started the plan. Katie? Stephen? Cassidy? Brian? Emily? Rebecca? Zach?
It was also revealed to the court that Ronald allegedly threatened a prison guard while awaiting trial. But on September 26th of 2019, after 4 hours of deliberation, Ronald was found guilty of capital murder and was sentenced to death by lethal injection. He was placed on death row at Allen B. Polinsky Unit in Texas. But Ronald's attorney said that the jury was wrong, that Ronald was not a future danger, that he went after these certain people connected to his ex-wife and that he would never do it again. Prosecutors believed that if that could set him off, something else could set him off as well. They were also still living family members of Melanie, as well as Melanie and the kids themselves. Now, Cassidy bravely sat front row in the courthouse. She had her head down. She was crying when the sentence was given, and then she bravely stood and gave her impact statement to the court, but specifically to her ex-uncle.
The jury decided that you are going to die by lethal injection, and I respect their decision. Do I think the punishment fits the crime? No. I hope that when you die, you will get the punishment you deserve from God. Only God can help you now. Are you going to feel remorse one day? I don't know. And I want to tell you that I don't care anymore. I'm going to continue to live my life with happiness, and I'm going to move forward, and I'm going to forget about this, and I'm going to forget about you. You've been in control long enough, and now your game is up. You're not in control anymore. You've lost, and this is it for you. God will be there for you when you need him, and that time is going to come quickly for you, whether you like it or not. I feel a lot of relief. It feels like a huge weight has been lifted off of my chest, and I feel like justice is finally going to be served, and I'm glad that I don't have to worry about it anymore, or drive down a lot to meet with these lovely ladies.
Nothing personal.
Nothing personal. That we all get along.
Cassidy, after you delivered your victim's impact statement, you walked past George, you had a smile on your face, and you mouthed, "Thank you." Can you describe to us your emotions at that point after you made your victim's impact statement and you walked past those doors and you felt compelled to thank them?
I just don't understand how someone can sit through something like that and see all those pictures and hear all those things and hear all these awful atrocities that this guy did. And so I wanted to thank them for their strength and for their bravery to make the right decision.
Now, Melanie, the wife of Ronald, the ex-wife, a victim herself, has mentioned that she feels like she paid the ultimate price for freedom, losing her sister and her nieces and nephews. She lost her loved ones while trying to save herself, and it breaks my heart that she even feels an ounce of fault for that and would blame herself in any way. This man shouldn't have been a man that she had to get away from in the first place. It all started with him and it ended with him. I just hope that Melanie and Cassidy have really learned to lean on each other through all of this, because they are both survivors in their own way. And Cassidy's brave call to 911 while suffering from an injury herself, and after seeing her family murdered, that is believed to have saved the the rest of her family, especially her grandparents, who were the next target. He was actually stopped not far from the grandparents' home by police after her call. The grandparents say that she is their hero. Cassidy's grandfather actually said that Cassidy had told them that angels were inside their home as one by one her family was killed, and that those angels were the ones who gave her the message to stay quiet. And that is ultimately how she survived, was hearing those words, not knowing what to do in that situation, but somehow knowing everything, knowing just how to survive. A young girl who was surrounded by darkness and horror, and her faith, because she is a very religious little girl and now woman, her faith brought her through that. Whether you believe in it or not, whether you think it was just the universe or her own survival instinct, whatever it is, something snapped into place that day and allowed her to do what she needed to do to save the rest of her family. And to be so strong and mature, even in the following days, I hope that she has gotten to be around people who understand that strength she shows isn't necessarily because she is completely okay. I hope that they know that she needs to know she can break down. I hope that they've allowed her the therapy, the healing, the ability just to mourn the loss and really her childhood. I think she can truly change the world. I cannot wait to see, the things that she does, because I feel like just like Elizabeth Smart and everything she's done after her abduction, I think that Cassidy Stay could make such a huge difference in this world. But she is a survivor through and through. And so is Melanie, for everything that she went through, for getting her kids out before anything could happen to them. There's so much horror that goes into becoming a survivor. So I just want to shed light on, the good people of the world. So don't forget to speak up. Your voice is powerful enough, and I love you to absolute pieces. Okay. Also, don't forget to download Budoku down below or the QR code on the screen.